Okay, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we begin a new Masechta Nedarim. So this Masechta is different than other Masechtas. First of all, regarding the Pirushim here on the Amud, as you see, so you have the Ran on the left side of the Gemara, which in most Masechtas you don't have the Ran printed on the page. And on the right side, it says that it's Rashi, but the consensus by most commentaries is that this is not Rashi. Not Rashi. They printed it, whoever decided to name it as Rashi, but most opinions say that this is actually not Rashi. And the accepted Pirish on the Gemara is more what's used is the Ran. So we'll for the most part try to learn together with the Ran and the Pshat of the Gemara. Regarding the Masechta Nedarim, so as the name of the Masechta indicates, we're going to be learning about a person that makes a vow and how the vow takes effect, when it takes effect, the different languages that a person uses when he makes a vow. Is it meaningful? Is it not meaningful? And many different things. There's also later on in the Masechta benigay to a person that wants to dissolve his vow, he wants to uproot his vow, and so on. What else? There's a lot coming in this Masechta, but that's all. Everything is revolving around the Inyan of Nedarim. Just one thing to point out regarding the concept of a neder. The idea of a neder is a big chiddush. The idea that a yid, with the words of his mouth, can come along and take something which is completely permitted, and he has the power to change this for him that now becomes forbidden for him to use. This is the power of a person's words. I spoke about this one time, benegay to the Inyan of dibur and even machshava. You find in Torah in various places the power of a person's thoughts, that sometimes even with a person's machshava, he could have the ability to change the status of something from chulin to hektish. And over here we see with the power of a person's words that you could change the status of an object that it now becomes aser. And the Gemara will soon explain that this is the power of a neder, that it changes the chefza itself. The very object itself becomes aser. This shows how powerful the words of a person are. Okay, let's begin. Zakt Heilige Mishnah. Kol kinuyei nedarim kenedarim. The different kinuyim, meaning various different nicknames, that's the literal translation of the word kinuyim, or maybe we could call it as a sort of substitutes, for a neder will be just like the neder itself. So what does this mean? This is actually going to be explained in the next Mishnah, but there's the obvious usual expression a person would use for a neder, and if a person is not using that regular term, but he's using some kind of a substitute, how does a person make a neder usually? So there are two ways you can make a neder. This is according to the Ran. There's an argument in Rishonim about this, but the Ran says when a person makes a neder, either you can come and say, I make a neder that this object should be aser to me. But then there's another way you make a neder. A person says that this object here should be aser to me just like a carbon. Just like this carbon is aser for me to have any benefit from, so too this object should be like a carbon. As we'll see in the Gemara, this idea, when a person is creating his neder through saying that this should be like that, is what's called hatfasa. That you're saying that whatever isser there is on one object should also be brought over to this object here. Sort of. That's sort of what the person's saying. Hatfasa, when you're like connecting, sort of, or you're like that the isser that there is in a carbon should go on this object here. So typically, when a person would make a neder, a person would say that hareza alai ke carbon, that this object here should be for me like a carbon. That would be the regular expression. Now, however, what if a person doesn't use the term carbon? A person uses some other substitute. The person says that this should be for me like a kainam. You heard the expression of kainam? Yeah. Kainam is a word that means the same as carbon, but it's just a substitute. It's another word. There's a few words for this. The Mishnah will say later, kainam, kainech, kaines, various different words which mean carbon. Now these kinuyim, these substitutes of the word carbon, the Gemara will later discuss where they come from. It's a machlokes in the Gemara between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Some say, one opinion is that it's actually words that mean the same thing. It means also carbon, but it's just in a different language. In different languages in those times it meant carbon. And others say that Chazal created these substitutes of words. And they said that if you use these substitutes, then it has the same significance, it means the same thing like a carbon. So that's the first halacha the Mishnah is saying. When a person makes a neder, and he doesn't use the word carbon to say that this object should be also for me like a carbon, but he uses other words that are substitutes, the neder takes effect as well. V'charomim, sorry. V'charomim kecharomim. So the concept of a cherem, so the Ran over here says that the idea of a cherem is another way of making a neder. The term cherem is taken from what it says in the Torah, Parshas B'chokaisai, when it speaks about a person that wants to dedicate something to Hektish, it uses the term cherem, that you're dedicating it to Hektish. So a person that wants to make something asa to him, he could also use the term cherem. A person could say, Hareza alai cherem, this thing will be on me cherem. What does cherem mean? Cherem means it becomes aser. Now in the Torah, the term cherem is used benigay to when you makdish something, to hektish. But over here, in our Mishnah, when it says charamim, the Ran says we're not talking about making something hektish, we're talking about making something asa to you. We're using the same term that you would use when you would make something hektish, but we're talking about making something asa to you. So similar, when it comes to cherem, so there's also certain substitutes for this word cherem, which will be brought in the next Mishnah. Cherem, cheref, I remember all the substitutes, but there's other words that a person can substitute instead of the word cherem. So when you say that this thing should be cherem to me, even if you don't use the actual word cherem, but you use other substitutes, it takes effect in the same way. Shvuah is k'shvuah, and the same thing also when it comes to a person that makes a shvuah, he swears that I'm not going to have any benefit of this item. So this is another way how a person can make something asa to him, not by a neder, but through a shvuah. So he uses also various different substitutes. In the shvuah that he says, k'shvuah, it takes effect the same like the shvuah itself. And then also the final thing is the nezira is k'nezira, is various different expressions of the word nazir. There's other words that are naziach and other words that are similar to the word nazir. And even if you don't, a person would typically come and say, Hareni nazir, or Hey nazir, I will be a nazir. That's the way a person would accept upon himself to be a nazir. But if he did not use the word nazir directly, he used other words that are substitutes for the word nazir, the naziris will also take effect. Okay, so it's the same concept that applies to all these different cases. Now the Mishnah continues. The next part of the Mishnah, as the Gemara will point out, is actually coming to explain yet another aspect that there is regarding a neder. And that is what's known as the yodais for Nedarim. Yodais literally means handles. What's a handle? Just like regarding a vessel. When you have a handle of a vessel, so it's not the vessel itself, it's just the handle of the vessel. So too, when a person makes a statement, sometimes a person makes a partial statement, and he doesn't complete it. So it's just like you have a part of the vessel, a handle of the vessel. The statement the person says, you can see what he meant to say, but he didn't spell it out fully. So when a person makes a neder, the Gemara will explain and learn out that we know from a pasuk that even when a person says a partial neder, partial statement, the neder takes effect. That's the concept of a yad by a neder. So the Mishnah here brings examples for this. Person says to his friend, Mudrani mimcha, I make a neder of you. Mufreshani mimcha, I'll be separated from you. Miruchokani mimcha, I'll be distanced from you. And then he adds to one of these three, he says, I'm going to be separated from you or distanced from you for what? Shani eichelach, regarding me eating from you. Shani tayim lacha, regarding me tasting something that belongs to you. So aser, he's going to be aser. So these statements are actually considered to be incomplete statements because, for example, when a person says mudrani mimcha shani eichel lacha, the person didn't specifically spell out and say the word iser, that he's going to be asa. He just said mudrani mimcha, a neder from you regarding eating from you. But he didn't use the actual term asa clearly. He just said a vow from you not to eat from you. He didn't even necessarily use the word not. He just said sha'ani oichalacha. There's actually two gerses here in this Mishnah. The Ran here brings that there are guides, the word she'eni, that I will not eat from you. But even if you are guided, the word she'eni, that I will not, but nevertheless he didn't clearly spell out the word iser, right? And or carbon. Another way, like I mentioned before, another way how to make a neder is you say that this should be like a carbon to me. He didn't say any of those terminologies, but nevertheless he will become asa with this neder because this is called a yad. He began the sentence and he didn't complete it. He becomes asa. Okay, just to point out a basic question that many of the Mefarshim discuss here regarding this Mishnah. Once you see this last point that the Mishnah says here, that there's this concept of a yad regarding a neder, that even if you say an incomplete sentence, the neder will take effect. So the question then becomes, what's the significance of the first part of the Mishnah? Why is the Mishnah saying that when you use these substitutes in the terminologies for a neder, that the neder will take effect? For sure it should take effect. Why not? If we're saying that if you say incomplete sentence, that it takes effect, so I would think that for sure that the case should be that if you use a substitute for the expression of a neder, it should also take effect, because it's no worse than a yad, than saying an incomplete sentence. Why is that brought in the Mishnah as a separate halacha? So there are some that actually say that it's true. Once I know that the yad of a neder, you say an incomplete sentence, that it takes effect, so for sure I would know that regarding kinuy and nedarim it should take effect. And Lamai, the Mishnah is saying, even if there would not be the halacha of a yad of a neder, I could say that the kinui of a neder takes effect because the kinui, the substitute, is like the word itself, and it's considered to be a complete sentence. That's what some say. But others explain and say that the pshat in this Mishnah is that you can't learn out the halacha of kinuye nedarim from the halacha of the yodes by nedarim. And the reason is because when you say an incomplete sentence, it's easier to say that you complete a person's sentence when it's incomplete than to say that when the person himself went and completed his sentence, and he completed it in an incorrect manner, he used a word that doesn't mean carbon, that doesn't mean isser. He used some other substitute that we're going to say that substitute actually means neder. Maybe I would say, when you did not complete your sentence, so then we complete it for you. That's the idea of a yad. But if you did complete your sentence, and you used the wrong expression, so then because you used the wrong expression, we can't complete your sentence for you, you completed your sentence. So maybe there the neder should not take effect. That's why the Tana had to teach the first din, that even if you did complete your sentence with the wrong expression, nevertheless, it does take effect. The Mishnah here, he's using the term, he's not using the term aser, he's using the term substitute to the term carbon. You can use the term aser for a neder, or you can use the term carbon for a neder. So when it talks about the kinui and nedarim, it's referring to a person that wanted to make a neder by saying that this object should be like a carbon. But he didn't say the word carbon. Instead of using the word carbon, he said a substitute for the word carbon. That's what it's referring to. Okay, the Mishnah brings another case where a person does not spell out, he doesn't finish off his sentence clearly that it's a isser. This is another example of a yad of a neder. Menuda ni lecha, a person uses this expression and says that I'm menuda from you, which means I should be separated from you. It's another expression. How do they translate over here the word menuda? Menuda means, and they don't even translate it over here. Excommunicated, wow, that's a literal translation. So a person, again, detached, okay, a person uses this expression of menuda. So according to the Chachamim, according to the Tanakama of this Mishnah, the word menuda doesn't actually mean a yad of a neder. Menuda nilucha is not clear enough for us to finish off a sentence that it means a neder. But Rabbi Akiva hayachoichech bezeh lahachmer. Rabbi Akiva was doubtful about this, and he leaned more towards being stringent to say when you use this expression of menuda that it should mean that you are going to be aser by using this expression. Yeah. Okay, Zok Teile Gemara Kol Kinuye Nedarim Kenedarim. So the Mishnah said all these nicknames, all these various substitutes for Nedarim are like the Nedarim itself. So now the question is, if you compare the opening of our Masechta Nedarim to the opening of Masechta Nazir, so the question is as follows: Ma'ishno Gabi Nazir. Why is it that in the opening of Masechta Nazir, the Loi Ketani Lahu Kulu, there it doesn't give the whole list of various different cases where when you use substitutes, so what you're saying takes effect. Over there it also says Kol Kinuya Naziris Kenaziris, that if you want to become a Nazir and you use a substitute in your language to become a Nazir, you'll become a Nazir. But it doesn't go on to say the same would reply regarding a Neder, a Shavua, a Cherem. And over here, Umayshna Gabi Nedarim. And why over here, Masechta Nedarim? So over here, we should be discussing only Nedarim. That's it, nothing else. Over there, we're discussing only Nazir, so we're here, we should be discussing only Nedarim. But over here, the Ktani Lekulu. Over here, the Mishnah goes through the whole list of various different scenarios where a person could bring an Isser upon himself, and it explains regarding all of them that the substitute is like the word itself that you would say to bring that Isser. What's the reason it goes through the whole list over here? Answers the Gemara, Mishom, the Neder, O Shvua, Ksivi Gabi Adadi. Because I find in the Torah, when it talks about the Isser of a person taking upon himself by making a vow, a Neder, or by making a Shvua, by swearing that I will not have benefit from this, the Torah, in more than one place, brings the two together. Right? So if you look over here, the Rosh brings the Pasuk, Kol Neder V'Chol Shvua Isser. I think Tosfos brings another pasuk. It says, Ish ki yider neder oy hishava shvua. So in more than one place you find that the Torah puts the two together. So therefore, Tani Tartan, so it brings these two. It brings this halacha about the substitutes in the language of a neder regarding these two. And even the Tani Tartan, once it brings these two, so Tani Lakulu. So it brings already the entire list of various different isurim that a person can bring upon himself, or aser, that the substitute will be the same.
Tani Lakulu.
But regarding Nazir over there, it just mentions Nazir. Nazir is mentioned in the Torah in a separate parsha, and Nedarim, Shvuos, is not mentioned together with Nazir. So that's separate. Frek the Gemara, now there's another question regarding the order of the way it says it in the Mishnah. Velisni, if so, the Mishnah should say, Kinui Shvua is Basa Nedarim. It should tell me the halacha about the kinui regarding Shvuos after it says Nedarim. If you're telling me that the only reason it brings the whole list of all the things is because of the fact that it says in the Torah Shvuos together with Nedarim, so the order in the Mishnah should be the same as well. It should say Nedarim, and then it should say Shvuos, and then it should say Charamim, and then Iziris, because it's that's the only reason why it brings the rest. Okay, but the emes is that this question of the Gemara is not so pashut to understand, because the way I interpreted the Mishnah when I read it before, according to the Ran, when it says in the Mishnah the term Charamim is a variation of a neder. It's another term used for a neder. So when the Mishnah says Nedarim and then Charamim and then Shvuos, you can't really ask, it should say Shvuos right away. Charamim is also a neder. It's just another expression used for a neder. So why is the Gemara asking that it should say Shvuos before Charamim? First, let it say the two different ways of making a neder. So therefore, some of Farshim say that the Ran doesn't really mean to say that Charamim is another variation of a neder. Really, the Charamim of the Mishnah is referring to a person that's being makdish something to hektish through this neder. This is something that the Ran explains regarding the Mishnah, that a person that makes a neder, in our Masechta, we're discussing the Nidrei Isser, Nedarim that a person makes on an object when he wants that this object should become asa to him. But there is another type of a neder that a person makes, which is that he makes a neder to be makdish something to hektish, a neder for a carbon, which is not going to be discussed in our Masechta. But the Charamim, when it says in the Mishnah Charamim, the term Charamim actually comes from the Torah, where it does speak about a person being makdish something. So therefore in the Mishnah as well, when it says Charamim, it refers to things that a person is being machrim to hektish. And therefore the Gemara here is asking this question. Why are you mentioning Charamim, which is regarding hektish, before Shvuos? Which is the reason why we're bringing this whole list, is because Nedarim and Shvuos go together in the pasuk. So Nedarim and Shvuos in the Mishnah should go together. So the Gemara answers, I did the Tani Nedarim, the mitzvah chefza alei, because the Mishnah mentions a neder. What is accomplished when a person makes a neder? When a person makes a neder, what happens is this object, which was permitted, not changes. The power of your neder is to take this object and to make it an aser object for you. That's what the neder does. So the neder refers to the chefza itself. It changes this chefza, it becomes something aser for you. That's the first point the Tana says. So after that, Tani nami charamim, so it continues to mention another case where you do the same, which is charamim, the mitzvah chefza alei. When you say the term cherem, you're also saying something regarding the object. You're taking this object and making it aser. La'afuk shvua, this is unlike the case of a shvua. Shvua is different. What happens when a person makes a shvua? When you swear that I will not have benefit from this, the ka'asa nafsheim in chefza. When you make a shvua, you're not changing the chefza itself. The chefza remains an item which is still completely mutter. But what you're saying is, I will stay away and not have any benefit from this item. So the way a shvua works is very different than the way a neder works. The neder pertains to the chefza itself. You're saying that this chefza is aser, and the same as a cherem. So therefore those two come together in the Mishnah. And that's actually a bigger chiddush. It's interesting. The Mishnah starts with the bigger chiddush first. What's the bigger chiddush? That you're saying to yourself, yeah, this thing is totally permitted, but I'm going to stay away from it. The fact that your words have power to stop you from having benefit from it, that's one power you have. But then there's an even greater power you have, that your words could make the chefza itself aser. The Mishnah starts with the bigger chiddush of that's what this Masechta is, Nedarim and Charamim, and then afterwards it comes to the Isser of a Shvua. Just so that you understand this a little bit better, this difference of, this is usually what's known as the Isser Chefza or the Isser Gavra. So a practical difference. There's more than one, but one practical difference, so you understand the difference, regarding a person that makes a neder or a shvuah not to sit in a sukkah, for example. Will that take effect or not? So the answer is, no. It depends if it's a neder or if it's a shvuah. If you're going to make a neder, then it will take effect. If you make a neder and say that this sukkah now becomes an object that is usher for me to have benefit from, so then you can't have benefit from this sukkah. Even though it's now a mitzvah, now you have a problem. You can't have a benefit from this sukkah. But if a person makes a shvuah, the shvuah is on you. You're saying that I will stay away from this sukkah. It's not something that pertains to the chefza, but it pertains to you, the way you're going to act. So over here, you can't make a shvuah that you're going to stay away from the sukkah, because a person is mushba v'oimid ma'ar Sinai. You already accepted an oath upon yourself from Matan Torah that you will go ahead and fulfill this mitzvah. So you can't now come and make a shvuah that you will not. It's after the fact that you already made a shvuah that you will. Right? But when it comes to a neder, it's not a contradiction to the fact that you already made an oath that you're going to do this mitzvah, because the neder pertains to the chefza, to the object itself that becomes asa to you. That's one of the nafka minas.
That specific sukkah, that specifically, or to all sukkah?
That's specific sukkah. Right? I'm talking about sukkah b'chlal, even if it's sukkah b'chlal.
Every single sukkah?
Yeah. Okay, so that's one nafka minas. So this explains the order of the Mishnah. But the Gemara is now going to the next part of the Mishnah. What did it say afterwards in the Mishnah? Pasach b'kinuyim. The Mishnah starts off with the halacha regarding kinuyim, the various different substitutes you can use in the lashon of a neder, kal kinuyim nedarim. And then in Mefarish, when the Mishnah spells out specific cases, it doesn't even talk about the halachas of kinuyim. And then the Mishnah explains yadais, the cases of a person that uses a handle of a neder, again, which is a partial statement of a neder, which is and so on. When a person doesn't finish the sentence, he doesn't clearly say the word isser, or something similar to that. That's one question the Gemara asks. Why does it start with kinuye nedarim, and then it explains the concept of yadais? And visu, another question is, yadais inshi? Did the Tana forget to tell you that one of the halachas regarding a neder is yadais? If the Tana is spelling out the halacha of yadais, he first should have said the actual halacha that there's such a thing that exists, yadais by a neder, and then he should spell out the details of it. Did the Tana forget to tell you about this halacha of yadais? It's an interesting thing over here. The Rosh says on this lashon of the Gemara, yadais inchi. This is not the usual expression the Gemara uses for such a kind of question. Usually, the Gemara for such a kind of question would say an expression, yadais man dechar shmei, which would mean we never spoke about yadais. Why is the Tana spelling out this term of yadais if it was never mentioned? The Rosh says that the lashon of Masechta Nedarim is mishuna. It's different than other Masechtas and Shas. So this expression of yadais inchi is not usual for the Gemara. Okay, so the Gemara...
What does inchi mean?
Inchi means forgot. Did he forget about this? Did he forget about the Indian of Yadis? He forgot to mention it. So the Gemara answers, no, Airi behind. Really, the Tana did mention Yadis, but Chesuri Mechsere, there's something missing in our Mishnah. We have to add the following line in our Mishnah. V'hachi katani. This is what you should add into the Mishnah. Kol kinui nedarim kinedarim. As it says in the Mishnah, that the substitutes of a neder are like the neder. And then v'yadais nedarim kinedarim. Then the Mishnah tells you the halacha of that the handles of nedarim are like the nedarim. And then afterwards the Mishnah goes on to explain the halacha of the yadais, which is here. And then in the next Mishnah, it'll go on to specify and explain the halachas of the kinuyim. What are the various different nicknames and substitutes for a neder? But now the Gemara goes back to the previous question.
What's the yadais, for example?
So what the Mishnah said, when a person doesn't finish off his statement, doesn't finish off the sentence. Okay, so the Gemara asks now weiter, which is really the first question that I asked before, V'lifresh kinuyim bereisha. Why does the Mishnah not first spell out the halacha of the kinuyim? If according to now what we added to the Mishnah first says kol kinuyim nedarim kinedarim. Afterwards the Mishnah says yadais nedarim or kinedarim. The first thing the Mishnah should spell out is the first halacha it mentioned about the kinuyim. Why does it wait to explain that later in the next Mishnah? Answers the Gemara, because the rule is hahu desalik minei hahu mefarish bereisha. When the Tana brings two halachas, it's the one that it says last, that it just finished saying, that's the one that it will explain first. And the Gemara brings a few examples for this. Kedetnan, like we see in the Mishnah Masechta Shabbos. In the second perek, in the beginning of the second perek at Shabbos, it says, Bameh madlikin, bameh madlikin. What oils and wicks could be used to light Shabbos candles with, and what could not be used. And the Mishnah first explains what it just finished off with. The second point, Eimad liken, the following are the oils and wicks that you can't light with. And similar, further on there in Shabbos, it says, Bamet taimnim, Bamet ein taimnim. If you want to insulate your food in Shabbos, in what are you allowed to insulate your food, and in what are you not allowed to insulate your food? What does it explain first? The second point it says, Ein taimnim. And also, Bamet isha yaitze, Bamet eina yaitze. With what is a woman allowed to go out into the Rishus HaRabim, various different jewelries that she is allowed to go out to the Rishus HaRabim, and with what is she not allowed to go out into the Rishus HaRabim? And it begins with the second point, Lo teitze isha. She should not go out with the following things. So we see that the Mishnah always starts with the second point that it just finished off saying. So here as well, the second point it said was the yadais, the handles of a neder. So that's the first point that it begins explaining. Fragt the Gemara, but is this a rule for all Mishnayos of Shas? The Pasach, loy mefarish bereisha. Whenever the Tana starts off with a halacha, he will not explain that first. He'll explain with what he just finished off saying first. And here the Gemara is going to bring a bunch of different examples where we see that he does start with what he started off first with. But Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah in Baba Basra. So it says, Yesh Neuchlin umanchilin. There are certain people that Neuchlin umanchilin, they yarshin from each other, they inherit from each other, like a father and a son. If the son passes away, then the father will inherit him. If the father passes away, the son will inherit him. Neuchlin umanchilin. And then there are those that are Neuchlin v'loy manchilin, that they yarshin, but the other will not yarshin him. And it says actually over there, the Mishnah that continues, there's another few categories. There's those that are manchilin and not neichlin. There are those that are not neichlin and not manchilin. And then what's the first thing that it spells out? Ve'elu neichlin u'manchilin. It first comes to spell out the thing that it started off with first. And then there's another Mishnah, this is in Masechta Yevamis, Yesh mutaris l'balein, v'asuris l'yivmein. There are those that are allowed to be living with their husband, but they'll be forbidden to live with their yavam. And then there are those that are mutaris liyivmein. They're allowed to live with their yavam, v'asuris lebaleim, and they're forbidden to live with their husband. And then, what does it spell out first? Ve'elu mutaris lebaleim, v'asuris liyivmein. The following are the ones that are mutar to their husband and asa to the yavam. So again, it spells out first the first case that's mentioned in the Mishnah. Another example, in Masechta Menachos, Yesh tu'unais shaman u'levaina. There are those carbon minchas that require to have oil and levaina, which is frankincense, and shemen v'loy levaina. There are those that have to have oil and not levaina. And then what does it spell out first? Ve'elu tu'unais shaman u'levaina. It spells out what's mentioned first. Another case in the Menachos there. Yesh tu'unais hagasha ve'ein tu'unais tnufa. There are those carbon minchas that need hagasha. Hagasha means when you have to bring it close to the corner of the mizbeach, but they don't need tnufa. They don't have to be lifted or waved around. Tnufa v'lo hagasha. There are those carbon minchas that need tnufa and not hagasha. And it begins with the first thing that it mentioned. Ve'elu tu'unais hagasha. Yet another case. This is actually, in Bechayris. Yesh b'chayr l'nachla ve'en b'chayr l'kayin. There's a certain b'chayr, firstborn, that he's considered to be a b'chayr regarding the halacha of inheritance, that he gets a double portion, but ve'en b'chayr l'kayin, he won't be considered to be a b'chayr regarding a kayin, that he has to be redeemed for a kayin. And then there's a b'chayr l'kayin, he will be considered to be a b'chayr to be redeemed, but ve'en b'chayr l'nachla, but he won't be considered to be a b'chayr for inheritance. And Veizel b'chayr l'nachla. It starts explaining the first case that it mentions. Who's considered to be a b'chayr for nachla? Ve'ein b'chayr l'kain, and not a b'chayr for the kain. So the point is, in all these cases we see that the Tana begins explaining what it mentions first, not what it mentions last. And says the Gemara, the reason is, Halein, all of these Mishnayos that we just mentioned, that it starts with what it mentioned first, Mishum da'af shulei. Because in all these cases, if you look over there in the Mishnayos, it doesn't mention only two cases. It mentions actually 3 or 4 cases. For example, just by the first one. And when it says, Neichlin umanchilin, it actually says, there are those that are Neichlin umanchilin, there are those that are only neichlin and not manchilin. There are those that are manchilin and not neichlin. There are those that are not neichlin and not manchilin. It mentions a bunch of different scenarios. So because it mentions many different things, so therefore mefarish ahu the pasach bereisha. In such a case, it goes back to what it mentioned first. It doesn't want you to forget what it starts with. So when it mentions a lot, it goes back to what it mentioned first. But the Gemara asks on this answer, but we see that this is not so. There's yet another case for going back to Masechta Shabbos. Over there it says in the beginning of one Perek, Bameh beheime yaitze or Bameh eine yaitze. When you're taking out an animal into the street on Shabbos, with what is it allowed to go out and with what is it not allowed to go out? D'lo yafshe. It doesn't say over there many different scenarios. It just says these 2 points. With what could it go out and with what could it not go out? The katani, and what does it started off with first? It first says, Yaitse Gomel. that a camel could go out in the following way. So we see again here that it explains what it started off with first, even though there's not a lot of different scenarios over there. So that's a question on the point that we said over here regarding our Mishnah, that the rule is that Tana will always start with B'mai the Salik, with what it finished off with. Is that so? Elo, so therefore the Gemara says, you're right. Lav dafke. This is something which there's no real rigid rule about this. Zimnin mefareshu the pasach bereisha. Sometimes the Tana chooses to explain what he started off with first, and Zimnin, and sometimes like it does here in Masechet Nedarim, Hahud Salik mefaresh bereisha. The point that it finishes off with, that's what it starts off with first. So there's no rule. So there's no question in our Mishnah. We'll finish off with this point. One more answer. The Gemara says, or I could tell you the following. There's a reason why the Tana chooses to spell out the halacha of Yodais first. Yodais, the halacha of Yodais, Aidi the Asya Midrasha, because this halacha of Yodais was a chiddush that Chachamim were mechadish based on a drasha from a pasuk, Mefarish Lahaim Bereisha. It starts off with this first because it's more beloved to the Tana to speak about a halacha that's a bigger chiddush, that he was mechadish based on a drasha that he learns out from a pasuk. That's why he starts first with the halacha of Yodais.